Let's get joined up. Today's show is brought to you by Audible, and right now you can get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/joinedup. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. So thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a regular show about all things writing, including interviews with authors, screenwriters, and key figures from the publishing industry, plus loads of hints, tips, and inspiration for all kinds of creatives. You can follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast, leave a quick iTunes review, or just tell a friend. Right, cue that cheesy theme tune.
Put down your pen and stop your typing. Grab yourself a drink, 'cause it's Joined Up Writing.
Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination can go, and often does, go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 104 with new crime writer Victoria Selman. Victoria has created a new series of books featuring her ex-Special Forces profiler Ziba MacKenzie. A very quick update from me before that. Mickey Blake Book 2 has passed the 10,000 word mark, and I still await the next batch of news, good or bad, from my submissions of Book 1. Also, I've just started a brand new script collaboration with an upcoming guest on the show, comedian John Pearson. It's too early to give you any kind of real specifics, but we're both really excited at the possibilities. I've enjoyed coming up with a new concept and pitching ideas to a co-writer, and it's just been great fun to share the buzz that comes from something when you start something new. I've already had a couple of 4 a.m. revelations, which always tells me I'm onto something good, not just my insomnia. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how things develop over the next few weeks and months, so stay tuned. Because yet another creative writing project is just what I need right now. So much for me banging on about creative focus last week. Anyway, don't forget to sign up to the Joined Up newsletter. It's completely free, takes seconds, and all I need is your name and email address. As soon as you sign up, you'll be able to download a free inspirational 10 tips for surviving the first draft and beyond, and the 3-act structure template that I use for structuring and editing my novels. So just go to joinedupwriting.co.uk and click on the tab that says newsletter and free stuff. Okay, let's jump in with this week's interview with Victoria Selman. So Victoria's first novel, Blood for Blood, was shortlisted for the 2017 Debut Dagger Award, and it's a Kindle #1 bestseller. She's written for the Daily Express and Ham and High newspapers, and in 2013 she won the Full Stop Short Story Prize. She co-hosts the excellent podcast Crime Girl Gang, in which 3 crime writers examine real cold life cases, then solve them from a fictional perspective, and a new book, Nothing to Lose, is out right now. Okay, Victoria, thanks so much for joining me on Joined Up Writing. I really appreciate it. So first of all, tell us whereabouts you're talking from and how things are going.
I'm talking from London. I've just given my kids dinner and put them to bed, and so things are going better.
Always is, yeah.
Always is, right. Yeah, no, things are going really well. Blood for Blood came out on the 1st of February, and it's been doing really well. It was an Amazon #1, which was really exciting for me because it was my first novel, and it's been great. And I've got my second book coming out actually in about 2 weeks now, so all go at my end at the moment.
Yeah, it is. And it's obviously really close together as well, the releases, which is quite unusual.
Yeah, it's very unusual actually, but I think the idea is it's a series, and I think the thinking was if people like the first book, they'll want to get the second book quite quickly. And actually the third book, which I'm writing at the moment, is scheduled to come out in November, so
no pressure
there. Exactly.
So it's kind of very much building into that kind of binge mentality that we've got now with Netflix and everything else, the box set mentality.
Yeah. And I'm such a box set binger, I have to say. If I don't, I'm really pathetic. I don't stop watching a series until I can watch them all. I'm that bad. So.
No, I'm completely with you. I think a lot of people are the same now. It's the same. We say, oh no, or at least we'll say, well, wait till it's been on a few weeks, so I've got a few to go at. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's good. So why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about your main character of your thriller series, then, Ziba MacKenzie, and the
Ziba
latest book, which
MacKenzie.
is about to come out, isn't it? Nothing to Lose is the one
Nothing to
that's.
lose. That's right. That's right. So Ziba is she's ex special forces. She's a criminal profiler, and she so kind of think Criminal Minds, but a little bit more kick-ass. She's got very much a take no prisoner attitude. She's full of bad language, and she's got quite a backstory as well. So her father died when she was very young, and her husband was shot dead in front of her. So she's got a lot of baggage on her shoulders. And although she is kick-ass and she's incredible, I mean, she's as a profiler, she can read a person just by looking at their body language, what they're wearing, how they're talking, and make deductions about them. But despite being an expert in human behavior, she's not actually very good at dealing with people on a personal level. So that kind of thing going, which is a lot of fun to write. So I've been really enjoying getting into her skin.
So what was tell me a little bit about Nothing to Lose, because that's going to be out as this podcast comes out. That'll have just come out.
That's right. So Blood for Blood was out. So that was out on the 1st of February. And Nothing to Lose sort of picks up the story where Blood for Blood left off, although it can also be read as a standalone novel. And it starts with Ziba, and she's having this awful nightmare, and she wakes up and her phone is flashing, and she picks up, and basically there's a serial killer that has struck, and she's an expert in serial killers, and she rushes to the scene. But what stuns her is how much the victim looks like her, and the hunt for the serial killer turns on its head, because is a serial killer also after her? And while that serial killer story is going on, there's a secondary thread where Ziba is beginning to unearth what may have happened to her husband, why he was shot dead. And in so doing, and getting very involved in investigating his murder, she takes her eye off the ball with the other murder she's supposed to be investigating, and in so doing puts herself in danger.
Mortal jeopardy, as they say.
In mortal jeopardy, yes, exactly.
So what was the inspiration for the character, and how did you approach the research for an ex-special forces profiler? It's kind of quite specialist.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Well, actually, the funny story is I didn't start off writing Zebra. I started writing her as a male protagonist, and it was an ex-special forces guy. I was very interested in special forces. I think it's a really fascinating area. It's kick-ass, but also very, in some ways, cerebral as well, because it uses a lot of the sort of tactics and the sort of, thinking your way through a problem, not just kicking your way through it. And so I was really interested in that. And I initially started my series with a male protagonist, Jack Wolf, who was a special boat service. And my editor said to me, you know what, the story's great, the plot's great, your writing's great, but you would write much more authentically from a female perspective. Try and think of Jack as Jackie. But the trouble is, by then, I'd already fallen in love with this Jack character.
Yeah.
So I recreated a female version in some respects, and I set her in the Special Reconnaissance Regiment, which is the only branch of the Special Forces that accepts women. And Jack had been a journalist in the previous incarnation, but now Ziba was a profiler, which actually really taps into my interest area as well. I find profiling absolutely fascinating. I've read all this of John Douglas books and Robert Ressler, and who founded the BAU in Quantico, and amazing. And I've watched the Mindhunter program.
I was just going to say that. Yeah, it's brilliant, isn't it?
Brilliant. Absolutely. Have you seen Unabomber as well?
I have. Yeah, really like that as well. Yeah, really good.
Yeah, I also really love that. So anyway, so I sort of picked up that interest area and ran with Zebra in that way. And my editor was right, because she slipped through my fingers much more easily. I think when I was writing as a man, I was constantly thinking of the male body language. A woman, for example, when she's surprised or shocked, will instinctively cover her mouth, whereas a man is more likely to hit the table or something. It's very different. So I was constantly trying to think, well, what would a man do? But as Zebra, I didn't have to go into that territory. It did come much more naturally. But because I'd already fallen in love with this Jack character, I decided to keep him in as Zeba's love interest, and I took him out of the Special Forces, and he's now just a journalist, and he has his own little role as well. So that's worked quite nicely.
So how did that feel at the time? Obviously, presumably, it was exciting because you're going on this journey, and you're submitting your work and someone's shown an interest in it. But how did it feel when you got that initial feedback? Was it kind of deflating initially?
In a way it was, because like I said, I had fallen in love with this character. Obviously when you write, you do just,
Oh, yeah.
embody, or, get really into the skin of the character you're writing. And so I almost felt like I had to say goodbye to a friend. I think it was that feeling. And I was reluctant, but I was also aware that as a writer, I could only sort of see, a couple of feet in front of me, whereas I didn't have the outsider perspective. And Martin, who I was working with, is somebody I really trusted actually as well. So I thought, well, let me give it a go. And if it doesn't work, then I can always review it. But let's see how it works. And in a way, I've been able to have the best of both worlds, because Ziba has been just a fantastic character to write. She has some, great one-liners, and she's kick-ass, and she's everything I would love to be. But like I said, I get to keep the other character in as well, so it wasn't wasted. He wasn't lost.
Absolutely. And I suppose in some ways it kind of forced you to be more original than you perhaps had in mind originally.
I think that's absolutely right. And actually, like I said, Jack, the original character, had been a journalist, and one of the pieces of feedback I received from the agent I ended up getting when I was, after the whole submissions process, was one of the things she really liked about Ziba was she was a profiler, and she thought that was very unique, very different. She said, there are so many, sort of drunk detectives out there, or journalists, or whatever, and a profiler was pretty unique. So yeah, it did work. And I think sometimes when you have to think, you have a problem, you come out better for it, and I hope that's what's happened here.
Absolutely. So why don't we go back a little bit? So tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, and kind of what your earliest memories of writing were.
My earliest memories of writing, don't laugh, but this is ridiculous. My first novel, I've always loved to write, I've always loved to read, and I think the two go hand in hand. And my first attempt at writing was actually when I was 7. It was one of those beautiful hot summers, and my mother could not drag me out of my bedroom, because all I wanted to do was write this wonderful saga about talking dogs and evil sorcerers and God knows what else. And it was going to be one of these great discovered manuscripts that was going to shoot me to fame, but never actually ended up leaving my parents' attic. But it was fun, and I really enjoyed that. And I think I've always written. I've always known I wanted to write, but it's funny. I think dreams get lost along the way. And like I said, although I've always wanted to write, always wanted to read, real life came along, and I went to uni, and I left uni, and I got a job, and I was getting back late in the evenings, and I didn't want to write then. I wanted to go out with my friends, and I forgot the dream. And it took years later. So this is, gosh, I was in my early 30s by this point, and I had young kids, and Joey was just, I think he was, I don't know, 2 or something at the time, 2 or 3, and my husband and I were having one of those stupid chats about what you do if you win the lottery, which is extra stupid because we never buy tickets. So I mean,
well, that's a bit of a drawback.
Yeah, slightly bizarre conversation, but as you do. And I said, "Oh, I've become a novelist." And he looked at me, and I wasn't working at that point because I was looking after the kids. I'd sort of taken that decision, and he said, "But what's stopping you? Why can't you do that now? It's not like you'd be giving up a job. The kids are sleeping for a certain amount of time a day. Why don't you give it a go?" And I thought, yeah, why don't I? And it was almost like you need permission. I think I did permission for someone to say, give it a go. And I enrolled in a creative writing course at the City Lit, and I loved it. For a certain number of hours a week, I wasn't mummy, I was me, and I was doing something I loved, and I was with like-minded people, and we were critiquing each other's work and growing for it, and it was brilliant. And I then signed on to another course and loved that every bit as much, and started writing short fiction, because by then I was like, right, I'm going to write my novel. But as everybody knows, to get an agent, you need to have all sorts of other credits behind you, and it's one of those stupid catch-22s, isn't it? To get published, you need an agent, but to be agent, you need to be published or have some sort of track record. So I started writing flash fiction, and I got it published in various lit mags and local newspapers. And I set up a blog. It was some silly thing. I'd watched that film. I don't know if you've seen it. Have you seen Julia and Julia?
No.
No, it's not a very guy film. You probably wouldn't like that, but it's this. I think it was Meryl Streep maybe was in it, and it was about a woman from the 50s who was this super duper cook. She was like this amazing chef.
Oh, yeah. I haven't seen it, but I remember it. Yeah.
Okay, so she basically, this other girl in the present day, is trialing out these recipes of this 1950 chef, and she's blogging about how it's going. And this blog goes viral and it takes off, and she writes a book and it's all amazing. So I was like, hey, I can do that. I've got 2 children, and all the childcare advice out there, why don't I trial that?
Mm-hmm.
So I trialed Dr. Spock and Super Nanny's techniques. I thought, it'll be great.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to get a book published and a film deal, then I'll even have World Pictures.
Yeah.
Well, none of that happened. I got to write a little article or two, and a couple of papers on it. But it got me another couple of credits.
Yeah.
And it sort of all stemmed from there. And then I, after doing that for about a year, I started writing the novel, initially featuring this Jack character, and later featuring Ziba, and ended up getting an agent at the end of the day. So
yeah,
that's the story. Yeah.
So do you remember what that first thing was? Was it what became your first book, or did you write something else before?
I did write something else before. I think it's funny you say, what was the moment I thought I could do it? I think I'd always wanted to do it. At the point where I was starting the creative writing course, I knew I wanted to be writing the novel. So it was always in the back of my head. And it was more a question of, I need a certain amount behind me before I can actually go for it. And of course, the great thing about flash fiction is it's a great training ground in a way for the process. You're sort of, it's almost like writing poetry, isn't it? Because it's such a short amount of so few words you can use. You have to really make those words work.
It's a real discipline.
And you're condensing a story and everything else. So it was all practice for a novel, and I knew I wanted to write it. I didn't actually know what I was going to write, and then I guess I just let my brain start to have the thoughts and have the ideas. And after a year of writing flash fiction, I thought, okay, let's give it a go. And the first incarnation actually was a load of rubbish.
It's the same for most people, though, to be fair.
I don't know. You hear these stories, don't you? But it really was. I mean, it was beyond embarrassing and awful. I mean, worse than that talking dog saga I was telling you about. And I got my husband to read it, and my parents, and of course they were all lovely about it. But when I showed anyone else, they were like, oh God, no. But I wanted to do it, so I carried on, and I tried a couple other ideas, and then I came up with, I guess, what's the precursor for my first book, Blood for Blood, but with this Jack as the central character. And then I got the feedback about that, and I just refined it until it was the point where I was ready to pass it on. And I was really lucky because I used an agency, a literary consultancy, and the editor I work with flagged me up to the person who runs it, and he said, look, this girl, you need to read this book. And based on that, this woman ended up championing it, and she went out to agents on my behalf. So I didn't have that horrible, I mean, I obviously had rejections, but I didn't have to go through it all that in that very direct way. I had someone else to sort of do it with, and that kind of was quite nice. You felt like you're part of a team rather than just on your own.
Yeah, and somebody that believed in you from that early stage.
Yeah, and so that's right. And so when I got rejections, there was someone saying, don't worry, I do believe in you, and it will happen. And then suddenly we made some changes to the opening. And after we'd made those changes to the opening, suddenly I had about 20 offers coming through, literally. And I was like, oh God, okay. And
that's interesting. Yeah, so something clicked. Do you remember, well, obviously you remember, but I know you don't want to spoil the beginning of the novel or whatever, but what sort of thing was it? Did you edit a load of stuff out and start in a different place? What was the sort of, what was the nature of the change?
Funny. The opening of this book has been such a story in itself. I think in terms of attracting agent interest, it was more about the style I was using. So it initially started, it was based in 7/7 on the London Underground with the suicide bomber, and Ziba was on the train, and she spots the bomber before the bomb goes off, and she recognizes he's a suicide bomber because of her training and her profiling skills. But she's powerless to do anything, the underground, and she just can't do anything, and the bomb goes off. And with the woman who ran the consultancy, I think it was a matter of really tightening the language and focusing on those sort of the feelings and everything else. And that, I think, got it noticed. But then what was interesting, so it got picked up by all these agents, but then the publisher, and then it won, that's right, it was shortlisted for the Debut Dagger Award.
Yes.
So we've got that as well. So I was riding high at this point thinking, yay, this is going to be amazing. And then it got a great big deal offer in Germany. So I was like, I'm unstoppable. This is it. I'm sorted. Except, of course, it wasn't. And I ended up getting, again, rejections from publishers. And again, they were saying, we really like the plot, we really like the writing, we really like the character, but the opening's a problem. I was like, why is the opening a problem? And the reason was, it was as an English audience, people were worried that it would be too raw. Since the bombings,
Yeah, because it was for an actual real life event.
it was a real life event, and so many of us remember it. So many of us, in one way or another,
Course, yeah.
it. And the idea was people aren't going to want to read your book and then go on the tube. So it was like, okay. So but by then I had the book and I was really all for it. So I was like, okay, well, what can I do to make it more interesting? How about I change the opening? We can still have an explosive opening, but maybe it doesn't have to be the bombings. So I changed it and I made it a generic train crash. And that's not really a spoiler. It happens pretty much in the first.
Sort of in the premise, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And suddenly that was good to go, and then people were interested again. And that was that's the way it's been.
It was just because it was so specific, really.
I think so. But it's funny because you picked up on the real life aspect, but part of, in fact, all of my books, I'm fascinated by true crime. As you know, I do a true crime podcast, Crime Girl Gang, in which we examine real life cold cases and then we analyze them, rather we solve them from a fictional perspective. So true crime really, appeals to me. It really interests me, and all my books are in some way inspired by a true crime. And so that was okay, but that was okay. That didn't seem to be problematic for people because I guess the crimes that they were inspired by were far enough in the past for them not to feel so so raw, so difficult to deal with.
But it was just because that, as you say, it is such a big thing and it is in relatively recent history.
Yes, exactly.
So you mentioned there that the first book was shortlisted for the CWA Debut Dagger. So, well, tell us a little bit more about that book specifically and sort of how it felt to be shortlisted. With your first book there.
Oh, it was amazing. Because at that point, I only had. Did I have the German deal? Yeah, I had the German deal, but I didn't have a UK deal. So I was really, right at the beginning of the process, and it was almost the first point of recognition in some ways. So that was incredibly exciting. And I remember when the long list was announced, I wasn't up in. I think it's announced normally at Crime Fest, and I wasn't there that year. Normally I do go. And I got the email come through, and my kids had just gone to bed. And I opened the email. It said, long listed. And I screamed. And my kids, poor little things, they jumped out of my mum, what's wrong? I was like, nothing's wrong. And then it was a few weeks later. I went to the announcement of the short. Was it the shortlist? Yes, it was a shortlist, and that was really lovely, really, really special. And yeah, all very exciting, really, really a magical moment for me.
Sure. So who would you say? So you mentioned the actual first book that you wrote, like many of us, is it's not going to see the light of day, or you don't think it was good enough or whatever. I'm not sure what genre it was in, but give us a bit of an idea of who your influences are, because I know you've already been compared to sort of James Patterson, and what is it about authors like that and that kind of writing that you love?
Well, Patterson's amazing, isn't he? I mean, nobody plots like Patterson, and I think that's great. He sort of keeps you on the edge of your seat the whole way through. He sort of ramps up the tension and releases and ramps and releases, so you're never, just when you think you can relax, the next shot comes, which I think is brilliant. And I think his plot concepts are inspired as well. But the other thing I really like about Patterson that has inspired me directly as a writer is his very short chapters. So you have, you can read his books, and he says the pages turn themselves. That's the strapline, I think, on the back, isn't it? And it's true, they do, because you sort of feel, well, I can read one more. It's only another couple of pages. I can read another one. I can read another one. And before you know it, you've read half the book. And I think that's something that I really enjoy, and I've tried to emulate with my books as well. And the other thing that he says and does with his writing, which I think works really well, is he doesn't overcomplicate his writing. So he doesn't use big fancy words and that kind of thing. He keeps it very simple, very direct. And again, that really appeals to me, to kind of keep the prose very clean, or to try to. And again, that's something I try and do.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, I know we kind of joked about it at the top of the show with the pressure aspect of it, but the fact that you've kind of got two books coming out very, very close together, and then the third one is already scheduled for later this year, and you are currently, at what point of the current draft are you at the moment?
Well, very much an early stage. I've submitted the first draft to my editor, and I've had some feedback, and that's always the worst stage. You sort of, you almost, when you hand your first draft in, I certainly genuinely don't know if it's rubbish or brilliant. I mean, it's that level of, I don't know what it's like. And so that's always really scary. And he liked it a lot, but he had a lot of feedback. He's a brilliant editor, and he sees things in this really unique way, which is great. And he'll sort of pick up on things that I've just not noticed. But it means I've had to rethink many different elements. One of which, actually, interestingly, was the antagonist. There are two antagonists in my third novel. One is a bit of a Hannibal Lecter character, and the other is another serial killer who's not in prison. And the Hannibal Lecter character is he's kind of the spider sort of at the center of the story. And I'd not modelled him on Lecter exactly, but he's an ex-Oxford classics don, and so like Lecter, he's very erudite. In my mind, he was very erudite, and he spoke a certain way, and he would have had certain tastes. And my editor said to me, "Great, but hey, how about we turn the trope on its head?" And so we were talking, and we'd both been watching, I don't know if you've seen them, but the TED tapes, the Ted Bundy tapes. And what's fascinating about those to me is how normal Ted seemed to be. Ted, I'm talking about him in his first, first person. Almost, it's kind of proves that point. People couldn't believe he'd done what he did because he was so handsome and so charming.
It's that banality of evil, or whatever the saying is.
Isn't it? It's exactly that. And so we thought, wouldn't that be an interesting character to model? My character is called Vernon Sand, so wouldn't that be an interesting character to model Vernon Sand on? And I was all for that, and I thought it was a brilliant idea. But of course, it meant a complete rewrite of what I'd already done, and I had to kill all my darlings and start again. But it's been better for it, and I'm pleased to do it. But I was saying to somebody actually the other day, I felt like I was on a bit of a bucking bronco for a while, and wanted just trying to tame this beast of a manuscript. And I was saying to my husband, actually, I just about think that I've sort of beginning to sort of get it down to trot now. Yeah, exactly.
It's so you're feeling better about it.
A little bit until tomorrow, and then I'll start feeling bad again.
Well, that's all part of the course, isn't it?
Right.
So why do you write, do you think? What drives you to sit in that chair every day and bash out the words?
Because I couldn't not. It's like a hunger for me. I love it. And in fact, I always say to people, the discipline for me isn't to sit at my desk, it's to get up from it. I love it. And from when I first started writing, when I had the kids, it felt like a holiday. It was the time when like I said, I didn't have to be mummy. I could put on my me hat and I could just let my imagination wander. I didn't have to be telling my kids stories. I always tell them stories. I didn't have to tell them stories about I know, talking dogs probably. I could actually be a grown up again, which is possibly why crime appealed, because it was so other to what I was reading with the children. And I just love it. I couldn't do anything else. And I feel every day that I sit down, I feel so privileged to be able to do this as my job now.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So give us a sense of your writing process. So are you a plotter or a seat of the pants kind of lady? And if you were sitting down to start a new project tomorrow, how would you approach it?
I am so much a plotter. It's ridiculous. I am to the point that actually I plot things so carefully that the novels themselves don't seem to take terribly long to write. In fact, the first draft of book 3 took about 3 months, but that was because I knew every single chapter. I knew what happened. I had the whole, and you kind of have to with crime, I think, because, with all the twists and turns, you need to know where it's going.
Especially with that particular area of crime, that specific, those tightly plotted thrillers that you write.
I think that's right. But what's interesting actually is, and it's happening more and more as I'm getting to know my character better, although the structure stays the same and I know where the plot is going, this is going to sound terribly corny, but it's almost as if the character starts living on her own. So I actually had a scene I was writing not long ago, and the minutiae I don't plot out. I just sort of know the overall what's going to happen in each chapter. And my character goes in and she starts talking to this chap, and I think that I know what's happening, and suddenly it takes a complete other turn because I'm talking in her voice, and it almost got to the point. It was actually an amazing moment for me. It almost got to the point. It was as if I was watching her doing what she was doing and just typing what I was watching, like a movie unfolding in my head. And that was really rewarding. So I guess I became a pantser to that extent as well at that point.
Well, that's so exciting when that happens. I know exactly what you mean. Especially, I mean, I think I have, well, not that I have loads and loads of moments where they take over, but I have to find a lot more of those moments as a pantser, because I do pants most of the time. I flip between the two, but I'm predominantly, I'll kind of have a general direction that I'm heading off in, and I might know somewhere that I need to get to. But the only problem with that is you often do find yourself writing yourself into a corner or giving yourself something difficult to sort of get out of or solve or whatever. But that's where your characters,
fun, right?
yeah, and that's where. But you know, that is where sometimes, you know, even though the little voice inside of your head is going, "Where are you going? Where are you going? This is getting more and more complicated." Where are you going? But then all of a sudden, you know, as you say, sometimes, if you know your character well enough, they will just, that, you know, they're going to, you throw stuff at them and they will deal with it. You know, it's, and you know that it's right because it just feels real and it feels like that's what they would do, isn't it?
I think that's exactly it. And you know, when you say you've got yourself into a problem, that's almost the best thing, because that's when you are being real, I suppose. It's like, well, what would the character do at that point?
Yeah. I mean, I find that with a lot of like Stephen King's books, I think it's really obvious from reading his books that he's a pantser. And sometimes I feel like, I mean, I think if it wasn't Stephen King, sometimes I think an overzealous editor would probably make him edit out some things. Not because I think they're overwritten or anything like that, but sometimes, you know, he will go down a cul-de-sac, or his character will. You know, the character will go down, and you think it's going one way, a particular way, and you know, it just doesn't pan out, but it sort of makes it feel a bit more real. You think, well, okay, well, that's a bit more like real life. It feels a bit more realistic.
I think so. And it makes the journey more interesting as well.
Because you really don't know where it's going to go. So,
exactly.
Yeah. So what's the most helpful piece of creative or inspirational advice that you've been given, would you say, along the way?
Oh, my goodness. I've been given so many bits of advice. What would I say? I guess from the writing process, my biggest piece of advice that I was given when I was at the City Lit was, don't write with your editor's hat on. So kind of it goes to what you were saying just now. You give yourself the freedom to just initially write, just get it down on the page. Don't worry about how it's sounding. Don't worry about the words you're using. Just get the story down. And then come back with take your writer's hat off and put your editor's hat on and go back and prettify it. And for me, that was really an eye-opening piece of advice, because before I was trying to do the both together, and they constrain each other. And I think you end up with quite stilted prose. But when you allow yourself to wear the different hats at different times, then the marriage really works, and the thing comes together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think not to Stephen King's getting lots of airing tonight, but I think he describes it as you write your first draft with the door closed and the second draft with the door open, or I think is how he describes it.
Is that what he said? That's interesting. Yeah.
But yeah, it's that kind of thing. It's just, you know, just crack on with it and get your head down. I mean, everybody's different, and I've interviewed writers that do like to kind of edit as they go almost, and they're more comfortable with that, and they're happy knowing that the bit that they've just written is kind of really, really good shape and they know where they're going. But I've just found that whenever I do that, I can just get snagged in self-doubt and thinking, actually, why did I write that passage or that scene? I'm not sure whether that's going to work. And then I spend ages thinking about it and not writing the next one. Whereas it's so much, I find anyway, it's the old adage, you know, you can't edit a blank page.
But like you said, everyone's different, aren't they? And, you know, what works for one does not work for the other. And, you know, you talk about being a pantser. For me, I love the idea. I would love to be able to be like that. But I find that I personally just need the structure. And for you, it's probably the other way around. If you tried to have the structure, you'd probably feel constrained.
I think, it's funny because, I think it's a bit like there's a whole thing between singers, rock stars and comedians. Comedians usually want to be rock stars, and rock stars want to be comedians, and it's a bit like that with pantsers and plotters. I always find it's like,
that's interesting.
Plotters always say, "Oh, I wish that I could pants," and pantsers always say, "Oh, I just wish that I could plot my novels more." And rather than just accepting kind of who we are, but I find that, there is a big part of me that would love to sit down and really detailed plot so that I can, every time I sit down to write, especially, if you're fitting it around a day job and stuff like that, and you're writing in these blocks of time, I often find that if I know I've got an hour to sit down and write, then I want to write.
Yeah,
I don't want to sit down and think about stuff or have a pen. But the thing with it is that is part of the writing process. But it's just that when I sit down and I've got the hour, I want to write. So it would be great to say, just plot it out and go, okay, look at my plan and go, okay, well, that's the scene that you're writing this, tonight, or that's the chapter that you've got to go. So just go at it.
Yeah.
And the edit is an absolute nightmare as a pantser.
You know what the edit's anyway. I've told you I'm editing right now, and it's so depressing. I'm so miserable at the moment because you don't have that freedom, do you? You're not on the creative flight. You're just you're bogged down in the detail of it, and you're making the words work, and you're kind of going over and thinking, oh my God, this is crap.
Yeah, I know. I mean, there's good and bad parts with it, because I do like it when I love it when you kind of, sometimes you'll have one scene that's, I don't know, it's like chapter 5 or something, then you've got chapter 9, and you've got this big load of mess that might be in between or whatever, but you take one chapter out that's in between those chapters, and then all of a sudden everything just goes, and just suddenly gets that a bit tighter, and you're like,
yes.
I don't need that now. I can go straight from there to there, and
that is rewarding, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
No, I absolutely agree. And just sort of actually almost reading it as a whole is also very rewarding. To be able to step back and just see it as that kind of completed piece.
Yeah, and especially if you've spent, you write your novels, pretty quick, but even if you've written it in 3, 4, 5 months or whatever it is, you go back and you reread it, and I don't know whether you're the same. It's kind of a bit of a roller coaster, but there's parts of it where you go, actually, this is really good. I don't remember writing this, and then there's other parts you go, oh, this is terrible. Why did I write this?
Right, exactly. It's like I needed a coffee break.
Exactly. But I also find this. I've had bits where when I was writing it, I thought, oh, this is terrible. This is literally, I'm just getting the words down. I'm really, really forcing this. But then some of those end up being the best parts of the novel for whatever reason.
Yeah, it's true.
It's quite surprising.
Most work. But also, I don't know, then there are other times when it just flows and you read it over and you're like,
times,
yeah, exactly. And there is actually, like you say, there is something rewarding about sort of snipping and, being the surgeon on your piece, I suppose. So when it's, getting it to work, and then when you finish that, and that feeling of accomplishment that you do get from sort of, you've not just written it, but you've also polished it, is a really lovely feeling.
I think it definitely helps. It would definitely help to have somebody looking at the first draft from like a structural point of view, because I think for me that is the most complicated part of it. I know that when I do the very first edit, when I finish the first draft, then I go back to look at it for the first time. And it's kind of it's that thing of having to hold your entire novel in your head to try and think.
Yes. And
well,
also to be able to, when you're too close to the wall and how you can't see the writing, it's that kind of thing. For me, I always need someone a bit objective who isn't, my family or a good friend, just to, to critique it.
Yeah.
And I find that really helpful.
To give you the honest, brutal truth.
Yeah, but also to see the bits you haven't seen. I think somebody called them author blind spots. I read somewhere. I thought that's exactly what it is, isn't it? This kind of things we don't realise we've missed, or realise we've said, or just isn't quite right, that as a writer you just haven't noticed. But
completely, yeah. And it's those tics as well, those language tics that we all have, or certain words, like just is one of mine. When I go through and edit, I should just do a search and replace, because just for the word just, even now as I'm speaking, I'm just saying it. But
and then become really self-conscious about it.
But I think, everybody has it, or a good one of mine is always a name. There's usually at least one name that changes throughout the novel. It started off of something, and by the end it's something else, and I haven't noticed.
Oh, really? Do you do that? That's funny.
I've had that, or the spelling of it changes. I've done that before as well.
I do. You know what? It's ridiculous. Like I said, this is the third Ziba book I'm on at the moment, and her name is MacKenzie, the last name.
Yeah.
But it's the Kinsey bit is with a capital K.
Yeah.
And even I know how to spell her name. I made the woman up, for goodness sake, and I still write it wrong, and I have to keep going back and putting that capital K in. I just, where it's going to find it, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's strange. It's very strange how these things emerge.
Yeah.
So, just as kind of we head towards wrapping things up, you mentioned it in passing earlier on, but tell us a little bit more about, because you're a fellow podcaster, so tell us a little bit more about Crime Girl Gang and that podcast. And I know one of your co-hosts is a friend of the show, Nikki Mackay.
Yeah, oh, she's brilliant, isn't she? She's a really
Yeah.
good friend of mine. We actually met at Crime Fest, our first Crime Fest together, and we were doing pitch to an agent together as well,
Oh, brilliant.
with our first novel. So we've gone down the journey sort of hand in hand almost. It's been really lovely to have her alongside. So it's me and Nikki and another writer, Elle Croft. So Nikki wrote Eyewitness and The Lies We Tell, which has just come out and which I've just ordered and cannot wait to dive in.
Yeah.
And Elle wrote The Guilty Wife. So we're all crime novelists and we're all obsessed with true crime. And we, like I said, we analyse cold cases and we discuss them and we look at the themes, we look at what's happened, and then we try and solve them, but from a fictional perspective, which is fun. And we've just aired our first season. I think we've just come to the end of season 1 actually, and we've looked at 3 different cases over 9 episodes. One was in the UK, one was in the US, and one was in Australia, and they're all mind-blowingly crazy cases.
It's such a cool idea, yeah, because it's just like you say, it's just a slightly different spin on it, because there's loads of true crime podcasts which I lap up myself. But yeah, it's such a good angle on it. So it's a really original take. Well done.
Thank you. No, we've really enjoyed doing it. And, it's fun as well to be able to do it sort of with other people as well. Because as a writer, as you know, it's so solitary, isn't it?
Yeah.
And just to collaborate on something, on a project is really nice. It kind of gets us out of our little rooms.
And have you got any other true crime podcast recommendations yourself? Are there particular ones that you like to listen to or have listened to in the past?
Oh, gosh, there are so many, aren't there? Well, Serial. I mean, who doesn't love Serial?
Yeah.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But I also love the Netflix shows. I mean, so I've just watched the TED Tapes, which, like I said, was the inspiration for my 3rd book. Out of Thin Air was amazing and very frightening. I want to start watching Abducted in Plain Sight. I don't know if you've seen that one yet.
Oh, I've seen it, yeah. It's good.
Is it?
You will shout at the TV, though, yeah.
Oh, I always shout at the TV. My husband won't watch things with me anymore.
I won't tell you why, but yeah, you do. It is one of those. It is. Yeah, it has to be seen to be believed. It is unbelievable. Really? Yeah, it is really good. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've got to watch that one. So yeah, so much though, isn't there out there?
There is. There's actually a good podcast that I've just been recently listening to. If you like true crime, that's the Hurricane Tapes, and it's BBC. Yeah, it's BBC World Service, and it's about Reuben Hurricane Carter, who was a boxer in the 60s and 70s, and it's about a miscarriage of justice, or is it? But they kind of so they kind of tell the story of that. Bob Dylan wrote a song about it, and they reference that and stuff like that. But it's about
awesome.
It's there's been 9 episodes so far. I think the 10th comes out this week, but it's really good, really well put together, really well researched. So I recommend that.
Cool! I'll have to have a listen for sure.
Yeah, really good.
That sounds good.
So tell us. So Nothing to Lose is released on March 26th, I believe. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
So that's
counting down now.
Yeah. So this podcast is going to be going out early April, so people will already be able to go out and buy that. So make sure they can pop out and get that. So tell us kind of what's up next and where people can find out more about you.
Where they can find out more. Gosh, well, I have a website, so victoriaselmanauthor.com. We're asking for Twitter. I'm on Twitter, so my Twitter handle is @VictoriaSelman. It's all terribly original, isn't it?
That's the best ones, the easiest to find.
Yeah, exactly. I guess my books. So there's Blood for Blood, which was the first one. Nothing to Lose is coming out, like you said, on the 26th of March, and then sometime in April, book 3. Title undecided at the moment, but I'm pushing for Snakes and Ladders. So we'll see if
brilliant. We'll see if you win out when it comes out.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, it's brilliant. Well, it's been really good fun to talk to you, Victoria.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Okay, thanks again to Victoria, and do make sure you check out Nothing to Lose, which is out right now, and I'll put all of those links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk. That's it for this week, but don't forget you can find the entire back catalogue of interviews over on the website. Make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, or wherever else you get your podcasts to have the show downloaded automatically every time. Also, remember to get in touch with all your writing news, views, questions, or comments, and you can tweet me with where you're listening or why you enjoy the show, and I'll give you a mention in a future programme. Look out for the next episode when I'll be chatting to friend of the show, Jackie Kabler, as she talks about her new foray into dark psychological crime. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly, happy writing and reading, and I'll see you next time.
Joined up